There's been many cash grab DLCs out there, like the Sims 4's Endless add-ons or the Zero Content DLC of Tiny Tina's, but those are not the games we're talking about today, and those don't even come close to the magnitude of damage that's inflicted here. Risk of Rain 2 was an indie roguelike FPS game, with a fun gameplay loop where you shoot enemies to get items that would fall under damage, utility, and healing. These also have different rarities, and the items can combine for some very powerful effects, like having a gasoline and an ignition tank. The former makes your enemies explode and burn enemies around them, and the latter would triple your fire damage. It plays like a looter shooter in a more condensed roguelike format, where your character's interactions with the items are highlighted to make every run somewhat unique. Everything always felt like it had a place, and even when things were weird balancing wise, the devs would try and tweak with the numbers to make them right. A lot of changes were rolled into the game to try and enhance the experience. Maybe a boring item was changed, or a new ability was given to a survivor to rebalance it. The enemies range from non-threatening blobs to a giant lightning storm snake that kills you if you look at it wrong. All the enemies can be given an elite modifier that makes them more powerful or changes the way they work. These elites become more common once you get further into the game, and at the end of the game you can go and duke it out with the final boss on the moon. The game has clearly had some issues, but the devs were always on top of them and communicating with the community about changes and fixes. It was a work of a few passionate developers, and you could tell. The first DLC of Risk of Rain 2 was praised by critics and fans alike. Even though it had a couple of bugs, it mostly worked well and introduced a void infestation into the game that added cohesive mechanics with the theme in mind. Void items would change a stack of your existing items into it and twist its effect in a creative way, where void enemies would have these items' effects on them. But this isn't what we're here to talk about today. I just wanted to showcase that a good DLC was added into the game, so it definitely was possible to do this right.
I don't want to sound like a bit condescending, but like the amount that we love this game is to an extraordinary amount. Like I ended my stream on the day of launch. I cried. I was so overwhelmed and so like taken aback, and like I feel like something so big was taken from me. I cried after stream.
Seekers of the Storm launched in August 2024 and was immediately ridiculed by the community. But let's start with the little good this DLC brought. The new maps are visually stunning, and the new characters and enemies look good. Overall, the art and music of the DLC goes insanely hard, and is definitely a shining beacon of hope for the game. I've also heard good things about the survivors from my friends, and that they are fun to play. However, my fading interest at the game at this point never gave them a fair shot, so we will just assume that they were at least alright. Sail Star is an insanely fun item you can utilize at the start of each stage and use strategically to hunt down a big chest, or maybe try and save up for a legendary chest if you can manage. Chance Doll is quite fun and simple. It gives you a better chance at rare items from chance shrines. Lumenyl Shot is an awesome idea in an item to try and bring a combo move aspect to the characters, but it just doesn't do enough damage and it doesn't indicate its effect in any meaningful way. So basically how it works is, when you use your secondary ability, your primary ability would get buffed, but the buff is too little and it doesn't like give you a visual or an audio cue that it's happening. It's just kind of meh. Then there's a bunch of alright items that I'm indifferent about, and those are fine. They don't effectively break the game for me, and each roguelike needs some meh items to make the good ones feel more special. I wish I could go on about how everything was great, but there's so much wrong with the DLC, it's hard to choose where to even start from. It's important to add that every item in the game should have some sort of synergy with other items, so you can combo them together and allow for interesting situations when looting. There also should be balance with the amount of items in the different categories, so you can expect to have a mix of stats going through the game. Obviously, adding a lot of new items into the game will make getting old combos harder. This might make the game less enjoyable for some, because they were used to using the old combos, but then again, new combos should emerge from these new items, where you could use them in interesting ways. The issue is that none of these new items combo well into the game. We should go on with the items to look at the truly horrible ones to get a grasp on how little effort was put into this. I can't even fathom how they were conceived of. Even using AI to pitch ideas wouldn't have led to this. It's like I went to my mom and asked her to use AI to make new items and push them straight to prod. Pole-stealing Lantern gives you a 20% damage increase while you're under 50% HP, which in concept in a game would be great, but in Risk of Rain you never want to be under max HP past like the first stage, and should play extremely cautiously if that happens, or you're gonna get murked. There's a looter item that could be used as a combo with this that caps your HP to 50%, but I couldn't find if these stack or how the threshold works. This would be like a one-shot or get one-shot build that could be fun for like a run or two. If the item was given an effect like if you're under 90% HP but less overall damage, it would be better as some survivors want to use a bit of their HP as a resource. And it would still be a trade-off because there's a thing called one-shot protection in the game, where if you're full HP you can't get one-shot. Knockback Fin yeets enemies into the air on hit and will make it harder for you to hit them and easier for them to hit you. Effectively, you just give them mobility for no reason. It's like a difficulty increase in an item that just feels terrible to use. The concept can be fun. Maybe, I don't know, if it stunned the enemies it knocked up, it would be more powerful. Noxious Thorns is a rare item that gives you a chance on hit to inflict a bleed on a nearby enemy. Just being activated when you take a hit is actively terrible, as you kinda wanna avoid doing that. It also doesn't work on effects where you would do damage to yourself like Hellfire build. There actually is an item like this in the base game that retaliates when you take damage, but it's a lot more powerful, does instant damage, and it's activated every time you get hit. This can be used in some funny builds where you kind of do damage to yourself and every time you hit all the enemies around you. And this new item is so terrible, it doesn't give you the courtesy of even doing damage every time you get hit, which is already terrible, but it's a 25% chance. It's so bad, I can't. Someone must really love these get hit and retaliate items, because they added 2 of them in the DLC, but Jesus, did they really have to make them so ridiculously terrible. Antler Shield is the worst item of all time. It might actually be the worst item in gaming of all time. The Antler Shield has a chance of, when you take a hit, to reflect that hit back to the enemy. And if the bosses and your HP were somewhat in line, this would be an alright effect. The issue is that the enemies have like 50 times more HP than you in the mid game, and it just keeps getting worse from there. Even if you stacked 100 Antler Shields, and you got hit by an enemy that would one-shot you, but one-shot protection saved you, you would only deal back 1/5 of the enemy's HP. It's a common item, so it doesn't have to be extremely powerful or anything like that, but this is just way too underpowered. It literally does nothing. The worst of all these items is the Warp Deco, but it's due to a bug that we will talk about a bit later. In concept it's alright, basically makes you take 2 hits instead of 1 where the damage is delayed. Red or legendary items are powerful game warping items that you can always build around. The DLC introduced 3 good raid items that do damage or boost your damage in an interesting way. The issue here lies in the 2 economy items they introduced into the legendary category, and there's a stark difference in power between these 2. War Bonds is the worst economy item in the game, and it gets outranked by some common items for cast generated. It basically gives you a free regular chest per stage. Contrast this to the Sonorous Whispers, which on kill of an elite or a large monster has a 15% chance to drop an item. Picking up this item will immediately turn your run into a god run and would give you a free win if it wasn't for the 2 new elite types that were added in the DLC were both terrible in their own right. The less offensive one was the golden elite that would shield itself and then drain your gold if you hit it during its shield. This was annoying at times, but the bigger issue was what the HP scaling was insane. These were like twice as tanky as the normal elites. The second elite type is where the big issues lie though. The idea is kind of novel. You want to focus this elite down over anything, and any other enemy will reflect damage back to you in this area. Remember when we talked about how the enemies have a lot more HP than you? So you basically reflect a one-shot back anytime you touch them. So just be careful, don't hit them. Easier said than done, my friend. The whole game is based on proc chains, where you have stuff flying around from enemy to enemy. And when one of these chains, or an AoE effect hits the wrong enemy, boom, you're dead, nothing you can do about it. But say you get past all this and get to the final boss. If you don't want spoilers for the final boss, I will give you a timestamp on screen that you can skip to. Okay, so basically the final boss of the game, the last phase of it is a subversion of the game mechanics, where the final boss steals your items and uses them against you. And as you deal damage to the final boss, it slowly gives your items back and you will finally beat him. However, there's a bug where if Mythic stole a Warped Echo, which is a common item that you will most likely have in your runs, he will become completely invulnerable to damage, locking you off from progressing. You will just be soft locked there looking at him. So imagine a new player gets here and think there's like a puzzle to solve or some shit and they just can't figure it out. Hey man, I just got the new Risk of Rain DLC. Wanna come over and play it? Yeah bro, let's go. Hey man, I just got the new Risk of Rain DLC. Wanna come over and play it? Oh, alright. They finally fixed the Xbox main menu bug. We can finally go and play. Hell yeah man. So how did we get here? How did such obviously game-breaking bugs make it into the game? Well, the Risk of Rain IP was bought by Gearbox 2 years ago, and they moved on to support the game. Their big project in after this was to try and unify the code bases of console and PC, because the console ports of the game have always been kind of wonky shovelware type products. So obviously bringing the PC codebase to the consoles would be a great idea. But instead they decided to bring the terrible console ports into the PC version for some fucking reason. Honestly, if this was the solution, they should have just ignored the console player base and released the DLC for the consoles after releasing it for the PC. This would have also kind of made marketing sense, where they could have released it first on PC, get some advertising, then do it again on console and advertise it again. This patch just completely destroyed the game on PC and made it basically unplayable. And it's not like you could have not bought the DLC, the patch was applied independently, so every player would get this patch. They somehow managed to break their time management system and tie it into the FPS. So everything basically would be tied to FPS, like enemy spawn rates or some ability attack animation speed. This entire process was pointless though, because for the release the console players on Xbox couldn't even play the game, because there was a bug where they couldn't launch it for days. This cost $1,001 and I linked a tier list below, but here's some of my favorites. You can take damage in cutscenes. You can eat the bazaar shopkeeper out of the map. If you walk over imp or load spikes, they don't do damage to you, but running will. Teleporters can now spawn inside an inaccessible crate on a map ending your run. Outlines on items wouldn't load on multi-shops, so it was hard to see the items. Looking at your items interrupts sprinting. Damage indicators and feedback to the players were removed when taking damage. Enemies can walk through walls. Basically, we went from one of the most loved DLCs to a game with overwhelmingly positive ratings on Steam and a solid consistent player base, to a DLC that's universally hated by everyone. You would think that the first big update for your game in 2 years would make the average players go up, and it did for like a month or two, and then it plunged and hasn't recovered since. Some of the players were, and most likely still are, down patching the game to the pre-DLC edition using a link that needs your Steam details to access. This is why I won't use it. It just goes to show that there's so much love for this game that they're willing to risk their entire Steam account to play it. And if you decide to downpatch, download Starstorm 2. It's an awesome expansion mod, and it's free. The sad thing is, this game was fun and smooth to play before.
I'm Jonathan, and I'm thrilled to announce that I'm back on the Risk of Rain team as our community manager. I'd love to take some more time with a reintroduction, but we have some huge news to get to. We'd like to share our more holistic plans for Seekers of the Storm. Our ultimate goal is to build Seekers of the Storm to be something that can be celebrated by the community for years to come. Over the next few months, significant changes will come to Seekers of the Storm. The updates that we're exploring are expansive, so they won't happen overnight, but the scope of the changes should underline the seriousness that we're approaching this challenge with. We plan to release these changes in 3 phases. Phase 1 is going to be items and elites, Phase 2 is going to be the Full Sun boss fight, and Phase 3 is going to be the survivors.
Gearbox is trying to fix the situation and has fixed the big bugs. They released a roadmap to fix the items and other aspects of the game, and the item update is now live, which changed most of the items I listed as terrible. Especially the antler shield rework felt amazing. It now drops orbs that give you a movement speed buff, and it feels very satisfying to use. These changed items are not terrible, and they've made the items better. They still feel a bit detached from the combos in the game, but at least they have a use in the game, and every new item doesn't need to be scrapped. These items were patched to be numerically stronger, and they should be toned down a bit, as they have made the game way easier than it was before. On release of the DLC, the changes made the game insanely hard, intended or not. Especially when playing this game in multiplayer with friends, the HP scaling was just absolutely terrible and enemies would be like insanely tanky. The difficulty curve of the game flipped now, and it's easier than ever. The damage done by the code merge hasn't been completely fixed, and in fact when recording background footage for this video, I got an infinite stacking burn on me that lasted for like a minute and then suddenly started ramping up and just killed me, with no enemies on screen. The slight silver lining is that it seems that Gearbox is trying to fix this as best they can, and only time will tell if this game will ever reach its peak again. I truly think this is the worst DLC of all time, and if you disagree, let me know which DLC was worse down below.